Warning: the following contains sensitive content that may be disturbing to some viewers. For 15 years, the disappearance of conservationist Dr. Anya Sharma from the vast, untamed plains of the Serengeti remained a haunting enigma. Authorities and colleagues alike whispered of a tragic accident, perhaps a rogue animal attack or a fatal fall during a solitary trek. The prevailing belief settled like dust. She simply vanished into the wild she loved. Until, just months ago, a worn leather journal, buried beneath a termite mound near a remote research outpost, was unearthed by chance. Its faded pages, filled with meticulous notes and increasingly urgent entries, hinted at something far more complex, far more terrifying than anyone had imagined. It revealed a hidden narrative that proved her disappearance was not an accident. It was a calculated act. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe if you believe the truth always deserves to be found. The golden light spilled across the savanna, painting the tall grasses in hues of amber and fire. Dr. Anya Sharma felt the familiar warmth on her skin, a comforting counterpoint to the chill of the pre-dawn air that still clung to the metal of her aging Land Rover. This vast expanse, stretching to the horizon under an impossibly wide sky, was her sanctuary, her laboratory, her lifeblood. For 15 years, she had dedicated every fiber of her being to understanding the lions of the Serengeti, their complex social structures, their struggles against shrinking habitats, and human conflict. It wasn't just a job, it was a calling, a deep-seated need forged in childhood dreams and solidified by the first time she locked eyes with a wild lion, an encounter that had stolen her breath and claimed her soul. Each morning began the same way: the rumble of the engine, the jolt of rough tracks, the constant scanning of the landscape for the telltale flick of an ear, the ripple of muscle hidden in the grass. She tracked pride movements, monitored health, and spent hours simply observing, a quiet, unobtrusive presence in their world. Solitude was a constant companion, broken only by the crackle of the radio or brief visits from park rangers. Yet she rarely felt lonely. The lions were her family, their roars echoing through the night a lullaby, their silent presence a profound comfort. There was a unique, almost spiritual connection she felt with them, a bond that transcended the scientific. One particularly memorable afternoon, she sat near a pride, the cubs wrestling playfully, while the adults dozed. A young male, barely past adolescence, lifted his head and stared directly at her, his gaze intelligent and unwavering. In that moment, she felt a powerful surge of understanding, a shared sense of existence in this wild place. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated empathy that brought tears to her eyes, a silent promise to protect them. Yet even in this peaceful sanctuary, a subtle unease had begun to creep in. She had noticed changes recently, tracks she didn't recognize, unsettling silence in areas that were once vibrant with calls, and a strange, almost wary tension in the lions themselves. The wilderness, her sanctuary, felt subtly altered, a faint shadow falling across its familiar beauty. The African morning arrived not with a gentle dawn, but with a raw, visceral symphony. The piercing cries of unseen birds tore through the cool pre-dawn air, a stark contrast to the low, rhythmic rumble Dr. Sharma felt vibrating in her bones, a sound she knew intimately, the contented purr of a lion pride settling into the heat of the day. She knelt beside her dusty vehicle, the fine red earth clinging to her clothes, smelling of dry grass and wild oregano. Through binoculars, she watched the Mopane pride. 7 lions lay sprawled beneath a thorny acacia, dappled by the rising sun's rays. Her heart ached with a familiar mix of scientific curiosity and profound affection. There was Zulu, the matriarch, her eyes holding the ancient wisdom of generations. The three powerful males, their manes a dark halo against the green. It was a typical day, yet every glance felt like a privilege. A cub, barely a year old, tumbled over its mother's leg, then padded over, nudging Zulu's nose for attention. Dr. Sharma's fingers tightened on the binoculars. This connection, this intricate family structure, was what she thought for. How could anyone see them as just threats, she thought, the familiar bitterness of human-wildlife conflict bubbling just beneath the surface. She remembered the recent reports of cattle lost, the rising tensions in the nearby village. Conservation wasn't just about the animals. It was about finding a way for everyone to survive. A sudden snarl from one of the males shattered the quiet scene. He lifted his head, sniffing the air, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The pride instantly tensed, eyes fixed on something beyond the researcher's view. It was subtle, a shift in posture, a tightening of muscles, but Dr. Sharma felt it like a jolt. This was the wilderness, unpredictable and unforgiving. She tracked the male's gaze, scanning the dense bushline, noticing movement where there should have been none, a flicker of unnatural color, a shadow too angular to be an animal. It was a detail that didn't fit, a knot forming in the otherwise perfect tapestry of the morning, hinting that the coming days might be far from typical. The dust settled like a shroud around Dr. Sharma's worn boots. But it wasn't the usual comforting layer kicked up by her jeep or the pride. Something felt heavier today. It began subtly. A pack of jackals, usually bold near her camp, seemed skittish, their eyes wide and darting towards the north. Then, later, tracking the Duma pride, she found them strangely silent, hunkered low in the tall grass, not in hunting posture, but almost hiding. A shiver traced its way up her spine. A stark contrast to the equatorial heat. She dismissed it at first. The bush was unpredictable after all. But later, a fleeting encounter near the riverbank solidified the knot tightening in her gut. She'd seen Juma, one of the elder villagers known for his quiet wisdom, standing unusually still by the water's edge, staring across towards the distant hills. When he finally turned and saw her, his weathered face held a look she couldn't decipher. Not unfriendly, but guarded, perhaps even warning. He didn't speak, just nodded curtly, his gaze lingering too long on her, on the land. Just a bad feeling, she told herself, running a hand through her sweat-dampened hair. This was her life's work, her passion, documenting, protecting. The magnificent, tawny shapes of the Duma lions were her anchor, the reason she dedicated years to this remote corner of the world, enduring solitude and hardship. She loved the raw, untamed beauty of the savanna, the rhythm of its life and death cycles. But today the golden light felt muted. The vast, open sky seemed to press down, and the usual symphony of cicadas and birds felt incomplete, punctuated by unnerving silences. Each snap of a twig or rustle in the brush behind her made her jump, her hand instinctively going to the tranquilizer rifle beside her seat, not for the lions, yet for something else she couldn't name. The familiar contours of the landscape seemed to shift, the copias suddenly looking like watchful eyes, the acacias like skeletal fingers against the bruised sky. She tried to immerse herself in her notes, losing herself in data about the pride's movements and hunting patterns, clinging to the scientific detachment that had always grounded her. But the image of Juma's eyes, the unnatural stillness of the Duma, the prickling sense of being watched, they wouldn't fade. The wilderness, her sanctuary, was whispering secrets she didn't understand, and the whispers sounded like a rising tide of dread, pulling her away from the safety of her research and towards an unknown, unsettling truth lurking just beyond the horizon. Something was wrong, profoundly wrong, and the vast plains felt less like home and more like a trap closing slowly around her. The alarm sang its cheerful, intrusive tune at 5:45 a.m., just as it did every weekday. Dr. Evelyn Sharma swatted at it reflexively, her eyes still heavy with sleep, but her mind already cataloging the day's objectives. Coffee brewed, the rich, dark scent filling the small kitchen, a comforting anchor in the pre-dawn quiet. Outside, the sky was just beginning to bleed pale gray and rose over the distant peaks, promising a clear, cool day, perfect for the field. Her plan was meticulously laid out. Drive the familiar winding road out to the old logging trail near Blackwood Creek. Hike the 4 miles to the Upper Ridge observation point. Document the condition of the rare Saxifraga rubra colony, a delicate crimson bloom, sensitive to the slightest ecological shift, and be back by late afternoon. It was routine, yes, but infused with the quiet thrill of scientific discovery, the hope of finding new data, perhaps even a clue to the plant's perplexing decline in recent years. She checked the weather forecast one last time, confirming the clear skies, then systematically packed her gear. Sturdy boots, lace tight, worn canvas pack heavy with notebooks, press samples, camera, GPS, water bottles, and a few trail bars. Her fingers traced the cool metal of her small field knife, a familiar weight. A quick text message to her colleague Ben stated her location and expected return time. Simple, practical, the usual protocol. She typed, heading to Blackwood Creek Ridge. SXR survey. Back by 5 p.m. Wish me luck. And sent it, a small, almost unconscious act of connection before the solitude of the wilderness. She imagined his usual dry response, perhaps a thumbs-up emoji. The house was silent otherwise, peaceful. As she pulled on her well-worn hiking jacket, the scent of pine and damp earth clinging faintly to the fabric stirred a quiet anticipation within her. It wasn't just data. It was a connection to something ancient and wild that called to her soul. Stepping out, the cool morning air bit at her cheeks and the gravel crunched under her boots as she walked towards her aging, reliable SUV parked in the driveway. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, a promise of the miles ahead, of the quiet journey to the edge of the known world she inhabited, towards the place where the crimson flowers held their secrets. The rising sun cast long shadows as she backed out, the house shrinking in the rear-view mirror, the road unspooling before her, leading her deeper into the embrace of the forest, towards the Blackwood Creek trailhead, the point from which she would vanish. Dr. Alastair Finch glanced at the clock on the wall of the research station's main cabin. 17 o'clock. The sun was beginning its long, slow descent towards the western ridge, casting deep shadows across the valley floor. He stretched, rubbing his tired eyes. Eleanor should have been back hours ago, certainly by 15 o'clock, her usual check-in time after venturing towards the upper slopes. Initially, he'd brushed it off. Eleanor was meticulous, yes, but sometimes she got engrossed in a significant find, losing track of a few minutes, maybe even an hour. He'd tried her radio at 15:30, a casual Eleanor, checking in, copy. The airwaves hummed back only static and the faint, distant whisper of wind through the pines. He tried again at 1600, his voice slightly tighter this time, adding, "Eleanor, station check-in, do you read?" Still nothing. He walked outside, shielding his eyes against the lowering sun's glare, scanning the trail that wound down from the peak. Empty. A knot, small and tight, began to form in his stomach. He returned inside, the familiar scent of dusty equipment and old coffee suddenly feeling sterile and wrong. He picked up the radio handset again, the plastic cool and solid in his hand, trying to recall the last time he'd seen her, her cheerful wave as she set off, the worn leather of her pack, the bright splash of her orange jacket against the green forest. Now, the orange was just a memory, absent from the view. He keyed the mic, his voice losing its casual lilt, edged with a tremor he couldn't suppress. "Eleanor, this is Alistair at the station. It's past check-in. Are you reading? Over." He released the button, listening intently. The silence that answered felt vast, swallowing his words, stretching out across the darkening landscape like an icy sheet. The cheerful chirping of the afternoon birds had faded, replaced by a heavy, listening quiet. What if she'd fallen, twisted an ankle? The possibilities once remote now clawed at his mind. He pictured her camp just a few hours' hike away, imagining it sitting undisturbed, a silent testament to her absence. He had to go check or call someone. The vast, serene wilderness, moments ago a place of quiet study, now felt impossibly large, suddenly hostile and full of hidden teeth. He knew with chilling certainty that went deeper than reason that something was terribly wrong. He reached for the base station's power switch, his hand trembling slightly as he prepared to make the call that would shatter the stillness. The moment her absence was confirmed, a silent alarm echoed through the small camp, a shift from quiet routine to urgent, heart-hammering action. What began as a few concerned voices among her fellow researchers quickly escalated into a full-scale mobilization. Park rangers, their movements efficient and practiced, took charge, their faces masks of professional calm that couldn't entirely hide the grim knowledge in their eyes. This land took its tolls. Local trackers, men and women whose lives were interwoven with the intricate secrets of the bush, joined the effort, their presence a mixture of grim determination and quiet wisdom. The search area wasn't just large, it was immense, a vast, untamed canvas stretching beyond the horizon, indifferent to their plight. Dense thickets of thorny acacia snagged at clothes, leaving long, stinging scratches on exposed skin. The ground was a minefield of loose stones, hidden holes, and treacherous slippery inclines near dry stream beds. And the heat? It was a physical enemy, a searing blanket that pressed down from the relentless blue sky, stealing breath, blurring vision, and quickly sapping strength. Shouts of her name, initially loud and full of strained optimism, became hoarser, more fragmented, swallowed by the rustling anonymity of the bush. Radio calls crackled, reporting empty grids, no sign, nothing. Every shadow seemed to hold a clue, every distant movement a possibility, only for them to dissolve into the endless, frustrating sameness. The air thrummed, not just with the buzz of insects, but with the rising pitch of desperation. They fanned out in widening patterns, lines of weary figures, shirts clinging to sweat-soaked backs, eyes scanning relentlessly. The trackers moved with a quiet intensity, reading faint signs the others missed, their brows furrowed with concentration. The researchers, fueled by a mix of loyalty and terror, pushed through the punishing terrain, their earlier academic calm shattered. Hours bled into one another, the sun arcing mercilessly overhead, turning the world into a shimmering, suffocating furnace. Hope, a fragile thing, began to fray at the edges, replaced by a cold, hard fear. The bush felt like a living thing, actively resisting their passage, concealing its secrets jealously. There was a moment as the sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows, when one of the lead rangers paused, pointing towards a narrow, overgrown path leading down into a deep, shadowed gully, known to be particularly difficult to navigate and rarely visited. A new, daunting direction in the overwhelming search. The hours bled into days, the forest floor picked over relentlessly by weary hands and strained eyes. Yet the search yielded nothing. No snapped branches suggesting a frantic flight, no torn fabric snagged on thorns, no discarded equipment, no telltale sign of struggle, just the indifferent quiet of the woods. The air grew heavy, not just with the scent of damp earth and pine needles, but with a leaden frustration that settled deep in chests and shoulders. Hope, once a flickering flame, dwindled to embers, then to cold ash. Despair became a constant companion, its weight pressing down on every step, every whispered word. Where, the silent question echoed in every mind, a desperate, unanswered cry against the vast, unyielding green. Theories, born of fear in the gaping void of information, began to circulate in hushed tones around makeshift camps and over crackling radios. Had it been a sudden, silent animal attack, swift and brutal, leaving no trace? Or had the wilderness simply claimed them, getting lost, succumbing to the elements, a slow, agonizing fade into the cold earth? But then came the darker whispers, hesitant at first, then gaining chilling momentum. Had something more sinister happened out here, hidden beneath the canopy? The psychological toll was visible in the hollowed eyes and gaunt faces of the search parties, in the raw grief etched onto the faces of loved ones who stood vigil, clutching worn photographs, the vibrant smiles on the glossy paper, a cruel contrast to the current, unbearable absence. One afternoon, a grizzled rescuer, his face a mask of exhaustion, knelt by a stream, scooping water into his cupped hands, the cold liquid a fleeting sensation against his calloused skin. He looked up at the dense woods, the silence suddenly deafening, and a shudder ran through him. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. This felt like the forest itself was hiding a secret, a silent, terrifying truth that none of them were prepared to face. The frantic urgency of the initial weeks, the tireless boots on the ground, the buzzing helicopters overhead, it all faded like a bad dream. Years bled into a decade, then just over 11, and the relentless, consuming search for Sarah dwindled to nothing more than a quiet, aching memory. The official task force was disbanded long ago, the command center packed up, leaving behind only the faint smell of old coffee and forgotten hope. Volunteer groups, once hundreds strong, eventually dispersed, their energy depleted, their own lives pulling them back from the all-consuming void. The case file, thick with futile leads and unanswered questions, sat gathering dust on a high shelf, a silent testament to the mystery that had defied every effort. For Sarah's family, the passage of time was a cruel thief, stealing not just their daughter, but the very hope of her return, replacing it with a dull, constant ache that settled deep in their bones. Her colleagues carried the weight too, a phantom presence felt in empty chairs and hushed conversations, the shared experience of the search, binding them in a somber, unspoken grief. The trails they'd painstakingly cleared were now overgrown, the markers they'd tied to trees weathered and faded, slowly being consumed by the resilient forest that held its secrets tight. The human presence shifted too. New faces appeared in town who didn't know the story. Old friends moved away, seeking solace or simply a fresh start away from the constant reminder of loss. The once vibrant community effort calcified into quiet remembrance. Annual vigils shrinking year by year. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah's mother found herself standing at the edge of the woods, the same woods she had searched countless times, feeling only the cold, heavy silence and the undeniable truth that time had not healed, but merely buried the wound under layers of resignation. The leaves fell around her, covering the ground where footsteps had once trod with such desperate purpose. A stark visual of the world moving on while their lives remained frozen in that single, devastating moment. The woods stood impassive, indifferent to the passage of time, holding its breath, waiting. The sun beat down with a relentless, metallic glare, different from the warm, life-giving light they remembered from seasons past. It felt like a physical weight pressing down, sucking the last remnants of moisture from the air. They recalled the sound of the river, a constant, comforting murmur just weeks ago, a sound they'd fallen asleep to countless nights. Now, there was only the dry whisper of wind through brittle, brown leaves and the faint crackle of earth splitting underfoot. The river, their lifeline, was a cruel joke. Where cool, rushing water had flowed, there was only a winding scar of baked mud, crisscrossed with deep, ragged cracks that looked like wounds. A few stagnant pools remained, scummy and warm, buzzing with flies, a desperate, meager offering. Their throats ached constantly, a persistent, gnawing reminder of the scarcity. He remembered sitting by the riverbank just last spring, watching minnows dart between smooth stones, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and growing things. The contrast now was stark, a punch to the gut that stole his breath with each dry inhale. He saw deer stand listlessly in the inadequate shade, their ribs showing, their eyes dull with thirst. Even the hardy crows seemed subdued, their usual boisterous calls replaced by hoarse croaks. The vibrant greens had faded to dusty browns and yellows, the forest floor crunchy and devoid of soft moss or cool shadows. How could everything change so fast? The thought was a heavy stone in his chest. They checked the small creek that fed their camp, the one they'd always trusted to run clear and cold. It was reduced to a pathetic trickle, barely enough to wet the pebbles in its bed. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at him. This wasn't just hardship. This felt like the land itself was turning against them, drying up the very sources they needed to survive. The well, their last hope, felt miles away now, and they couldn't help but wonder if it too had surrendered to the drought's merciless grip. The heat pressed down, a physical weight against her shoulders as she crested the low ridge. Below lay the Waterhole, or what remained of it. It had always been the lifeblood of this parched land, a shimmering heart in the savannah, a place she remembered vibrant and teeming. Now, it was a cruel mockery of that memory. The baked earth stretched outward, a vast expanse of cracked, sun-bleached mud that looked like fractured bone. The water had retreated into a small, murky puddle at the very center, barely large enough for the desperate few who gathered there. A lump formed in her throat. This was it? This was the place they'd pinned their last hopes on? A young giraffe knelt awkwardly, its long neck stretched to reach the fetid liquid, ribs stark against its hide. Further off, a herd of zebras stood listlessly, their stripes dull with dust, too weak to push closer. The air hummed, not with the usual symphony of bird calls and splashing water, but with a heavy, mournful silence, broken only by the occasional weak bleat or the dry rustle of hooves on brittle ground. The scene ripped at her. She'd seen drought before, but never this absolute, this devastating. They're dying right in front of us. The thought was a sharp stab of guilt. She remembered days, years ago, sitting by this same waterhole when it was full, watching playful cubs tumble and vibrant birds flock to its edges. The contrast was a physical ache, a nostalgic moment poisoned by present despair. Stepping carefully across the brittle earth, she moved towards the remaining puddle, the ground groaning faintly under her weight. Every step crunched, emphasizing the dryness, the death of the land. The cinematic detail of her worn boot disturbing the delicate, curling edges of a sun-baked mud shard felt like a metaphor for their own fragile existence here. As she drew closer, the air grew thick with the smell of stagnant water and desperation. Her eyes scanned the muddy edges of the shrinking pool, searching for anything. A sign, a clue, something to grasp onto in this wasteland of despair. And then she saw it. Just at the lip of the remaining water, partially submerged in the thick mud, was an unnatural shape, something that didn't belong, revealed only because the life-giving water had abandoned this place. It was still, silent, and intensely out of place in the organic decay around it, a stark detail against the brown. What is that? The air, thick with the scent of drying earth and stagnant water, hung heavy as the ranger, Elias, stepped carefully through the shallow remnants of the once swollen creek bed. Weeks of relentless sun had begun to bake the top layer of the viscous mud, leaving behind a cracked, fissured landscape that mirrored the troubled lines on his own face. He wasn't looking for anything specific, just following the protocol of the widening search grid, his boots sinking slightly with each step, the squelch a lonely sound in the oppressive heat. His thoughts, a constant loop of the missing person flyers tacked to every pole in town, were abruptly silenced by a shape half buried near the bank, distorted by the drying mud. It wasn't a rock, nor a fallen branch. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. Kneeling slowly, his movements stiff and reluctant, he brushed away the loose, crumbly soil from a dark, curved object. It was bone. A dull, horrifying certainty washed over him as more of the shape became visible. Distinct and undeniably human. A femur, then part of a pelvis, fused to the earth by time and sediment. The muddy shroud peeled away, revealing not just bone, but tattered remnants of heavy fabric clinging desperately to the grim structure. Brown cloth, brittle and faded, the ghost of a coat perhaps. Further examination, a careful scraping away of the thick mud, exposed more. A boot, its leather cracked and warped, still containing the lower bones of a leg, and scattered fragments that looked like a belt buckle or a clasp. The vibrant life that had once animated these bones felt impossibly distant, replaced by the crushing weight of the discovery. The world outside his immediate focus seemed to recede, the distant buzz of insects fading, the gentle rustle of leaves turning silent. An eerie stillness descended, broken only by the frantic thumping of his own heart. He felt a profound wave of sorrow, a helpless empathy for the unknown soul whose resting place had been this lonely, muddy grave. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was a recovery, a confirmation of the worst fears. And as the mud released its gruesome secrets, a glint of metal, partially obscured, caught his eye near the skull, something that looked like a piece of a badge, offering the first chilling hint of identity and the circumstances that had led this person here. Yellow tape bloomed vibrant against the subdued greens and browns of the forest floor, a stark, modern scar across the ancient quiet of the Waterhole. Squad cars and forensic vans arrived, their hushed engines adding a low thrum to the natural sounds. The tranquil spot, once just a memory etched in local folklore, was now a somber theater of inquiry. Detectives stepped carefully over uneven ground, their expressions a grim tableau of the duty ahead. Forensic specialists, armed with tools and sterile bags, moved with practiced reverence. An investigator, Agent Miller, paused, his gaze sweeping over the familiar curve of the Waterhole, a place he'd visited as a child, skipping stones. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, felt like a cruel trick of time against the grim reality unfolding. This quiet arrival marked the loud, painful reopening of a case long assumed buried. The scene was meticulously cordoned off, the invisible line a barrier between the living and the long-departed secrets held within the earth. Under the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, the careful work began. Officers secured the perimeter, their movements precise, while the forensic team knelt by the dark water's edge. Every stone, every clump of soil, was examined with painstaking detail. Hands and gloved fingers probed gently, sifting through sediment, their focus absolute. The air, usually fresh with the scent of pine and damp earth, now carried the faint, sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with anticipation. A deep sadness permeated the professional detachment. Sadness for the quiet tragedy lying beneath, coupled with a fierce, grim determination to find answers. This was not just a recovery. It was a conversation with the past, a promise whispered over unearthed secrets. A glint of metal caught the sun near the disturbed earth, small but distinct, a cold spark of revelation waiting to be fully understood. It was a silent call, pulling the investigation deeper into the woods, away from the water's edge. Under the stark, unforgiving glare of the worklights, the forensic tent hummed with a quiet, meticulous energy that felt profoundly disrespectful to the stillness of the earth outside. He watched from just beyond the taped-off perimeter, the chill of the damp night seeping through the thin sole of his boots. Inside, specialists moved with practiced, somber precision, their gloved hands sorting through the fragments unearthed from the Waterhole's muddy embrace. What they pulled from the earth wasn't just history, it was a language spoken in silence, a final, terrible confession. He held his breath as a technician gently lifted a section of skull, turning it slowly. There, just above the left temporal ridge, was a fissure, clean and sharp. Unlike the jagged breaks expected from a fall or drowning. It wasn't blunt force trauma from impact with rocks, not consistent with the natural violence of the environment. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. Then came the mandible, held carefully. The jawbone showed no signs of gnawing, no scattering pattern typical of remains left exposed for decades. Whoever or whatever had been responsible had kept the body relatively intact, hidden away. The artifacts told their own story too. A belt buckle, tarnished but recognizable, was found near the hip bone. It wasn't corroded or broken in a way that suggested violent impact with water or ground. And a small personal item, clutched near where a hand would have been, was almost perfectly preserved, seeming too delicate to have survived years submerged if its owner had simply fallen in. The air in the tent grew heavy, charged with unspoken certainty. He saw the lead forensic anthropologist exchange a look with the detective, a look that erased years of assumptions, of whispered rumors about a tragic accidental end. His eyes fixed on the precise, unnatural fracture on the skull fragment, a single, devastating detail that shattered the narrative of a simple, heart-wrenching accident. It was a deliberate mark, a signature of violence. The quiet, clinical analysis had just screamed a truth nobody wanted to hear. Someone had done this. It wasn't the woods or the water or bad luck. It was a hand. And if there was a hand, there was a person. Detective Miller spread the faded witness statements from 11 years past across the worn surface of the conference table, the brittle paper rustling like dry leaves. Beside them lay the stark, sterile reports generated by the new forensic team. Precise data points, chemical analyses, digital reconstructions. The contrast was jarring, a gulf in time and understanding. He traced a finger over the name of a local mechanic who claimed he saw Dr. Sharma's car turning off the main road hours before it was found. Hours. The old report dismissed it as a potential misidentification, a common mistake. But now, the forensic analysis of residual tire marks at a different location, one much closer to where the body was eventually discovered, painted a conflicting picture. The new evidence whispered of movement, of a presence, long after that supposed last sighting. Miller felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Had they missed something so simple, so crucial back then? He leaned back, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. The hum a dull counterpoint to the frantic turning of pages and clicking of keyboards around him. Junior officers cross-referenced phone records from the original inquiry with the new timeline extrapolated from biological markers. The dust motes danced in the light spilling from the windows, tiny witnesses to the slow, painstaking process of truth revealing itself. He picked up the initial interview transcript of a colleague of Dr. Sharma's, a man who seemed overly eager to confirm the accident theory. His statements, bland and cooperative then, now felt heavy with unspoken words when viewed through the lens of the new forensic data. Data that suggested the scene had been altered. A prickle of suspicion, long dormant, began to crawl up Miller's spine. He wasn't just cooperating, he was guiding. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a tragic turn off the road. It was something orchestrated. He slammed his fist softly on the table, the sound sharp in the sudden hush that had fallen over the room. The pieces clicked into place, horrifyingly clear. The seemingly random details, the conflicting accounts, the very state of the evidence. They all pointed to a deliberate act, the dawning horror of what truly happened to Dr. Sharma. The betrayal hidden beneath layers of time and assumptions settled heavy in the air. They knew now, and knowing meant they had to act. Years peeled away like sun-scorched paint, leaving only the ghost of what was, until the forgotten corner of the attic surrendered its secret. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light, slanting through the grimy window pane, as Liam's fingers, calloused from a life spent searching, brushed against aged leather beneath a stack of brittle scientific papers. It was Dr. Sharma's field journal, the one thought lost forever. His heart hammered against his ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. The air tasted thick with the scent of old paper and settled grief. He sank onto a trunk, the wood groaning in protest, and opened the book. Her elegant handwriting filled the pages, detailing the final, desperate days. The entries chronicled her growing suspicion regarding Elias Thorne, the seemingly harmless local guide everyone trusted, his deep knowledge of the forest a mask for something far darker. She'd discovered his clandestine operation, illegal logging and resource extraction, poisoning the very ecosystem she fought to protect. A secret he guarded with chilling ferocity. Liam remembered Elias's quiet presence at town gatherings, his unsettlingly still eyes. How could they all have missed it? The pages blurred as he read the last entry, penned with a trembling hand. She described the confrontation near the hidden gorge, the snarl in Elias's voice, the glint of desperation in his eyes as he realized she held proof that could ruin him. He didn't want to argue. He wanted silence, forever. The sharp, metallic tang seemed to fill the air, echoing the violence described on the page. Liam closed his eyes for a moment, picturing her there, brave and defiant to the end. The rustling leaves, her only witness. It wasn't an accident, not a simple disappearance lost to the wilderness. It was murder, cold and brutal, born of greed and fear. The weight of the truth settled over him, a crushing stone, bringing a terrible form of justice, the clarity of knowing. It didn't bring her back, couldn't mend the broken years, but it stripped away the agonizing uncertainty. She wasn't lost, she was taken. The journal lay open in his lap, a silent testament, demanding more than just acknowledgement. It demanded consequence. The police vehicles eventually rumbled away, tires crunching on the dry ground, leaving behind an unnatural quiet. The main characters stood a little distance back, the dust settling around their ankles, watching the scene shift from a site of active investigation to something more somber. They saw the family arrive, hushed and heartbroken, their faces etched with a grief that was both raw and strangely softened by the terrible clarity of the past few hours. Relief, a bitter, unexpected taste, mingled with their sorrow. The long agony of not knowing was over, replaced by the stark, crushing weight of certainty. Whispers rippled through the small gathering of community members who had appeared like phantoms, a mixture of shock, sympathy, and a grim, almost primal satisfaction that the earth itself, parched and cracked by the punishing drought, had refused to hold the secret any longer. It felt like a cruel justice. The same unforgiving conditions that plagued their lives had ripped open the ground to reveal the truth, as if the land demanded atonement. The Waterhole, the heart of the search, now lay exposed, the disturbed earth around it a silent monument. A yellow police tape ribbon snagged on a thorn bush fluttered softly in the dry breeze, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity the family now brought to the spot. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch the sorrow across the landscape. As the main character watched Dr. Sharma's sister kneel by the disturbed earth, a single tear tracking down her cheek, they knew the physical investigation was complete. But the real reckoning, the slow, arduous process of piecing together lives shattered by lies and loss, was just beginning. The weight of that truth settled heavy in the air, a promise of the difficult path that lay ahead for this scarred community. The memory of Dr. Anya Sharma shimmered like a heat haze off the scorched earth, vibrant and painful. She had walked this wild place with a fierce, quiet devotion, her eyes alight with the thrill of discovery, her hands gentle with the delicate balance of life she sought to understand. Anya wasn't just a researcher, she was a part of the landscape, breathing its rhythms, feeling its ancient pulse. Her passion for the creatures that clung to survival here was boundless, a dedication that consumed her days and filled her reports with luminous detail. It felt impossible that such a life, so dedicated to preserving the beauty of the wild, could be extinguished so abruptly, so brutally, swallowed by the very wilderness she loved. There was a cruel irony in the circumstances of her end, a twist of fate so sharp it still drew a breath from the chest. The devastating drought, the very hardship that brought suffering to the animals she studied, had withered the earth, forcing the waterhole to recede like a cruel mouth, closing. And in that revealing void, where life usually thrived, the earth had finally given up its secret, exposing the grim truth of what happened to Anya. It was a stark, unforgiving reminder of the wilderness's dual nature, a place of profound beauty and relentless indifference. Researchers like Anya gave everything to this understanding, facing isolation and danger with unwavering commitment. Her fate underscored the high cost of that dedication, the vulnerability that came with immersing oneself in the raw power of nature. Yet, the truth, finally unearthed by the very forces that seemed to conspire against her, offered a somber form of closure, a final, painful chapter in a story that had haunted the plains for too long. Special epilogue. Her spirit felt tethered to the rustling acacia, the distant cry of a bird of prey circling high above. Though her physical presence was gone, her observations, her meticulous notes, her quiet respect for this land, remained etched in the work she left behind. The waterhole, now slowly replenishing with the first hesitant rains, no longer just held the memory of tragedy. It held the stark image of truth brought to light by nature's own hand. The wind whispered through the dry grasses, a mournful yet cleansing sound, carrying the silent acknowledgement of a life given to the wild, and a truth finally set free. It was a heavy peace that settled over the land, a quiet respect for the cycles of life, death, and revelation.